Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The dry, scorching winds of New Horizon Colony blew dust across the barren streets, once filled with life but now empty save for the few remaining survivors. Elvin's muscles tensed as he stood at the top of a crumbling building, gazing out over the desolate cityscape. In the distance, the towering metallic structures of the Zinther Command Center gleamed coldly under the planet's twin suns. Those brutal invaders had taken everything from him, his family, his freedom, and his people's will to live. But today, he had found something they couldn't take: hope. Elvin was not always a fighter. Before the invasion, he had been a historian, content to lose himself in the study of ancient human culture. He had read about the wars of Earth's past and the incredible feats of those who had fought for freedom and survival, but they had felt distant and irrelevant on this quiet colony world. The Zinther, a race of emotionless, towering aliens, had shattered that illusion the moment their ships arrived from the sky, blackening the heavens and raining death upon the colony. With superior technology and ruthless efficiency, the Zinther crushed the human resistance, enslaving the survivors to mine the planet's rich mineral resources. For years, Elvin and the others had labored under the Zinther's oppressive rule, their lives reduced to little more than the extraction of ore for their alien masters. The Zinther did not speak to them. They did not negotiate. They simply took what they wanted, and when a human dared to rebel, they were executed without hesitation. The colony had fallen into despair. But Elvin, though broken in body, found his mind wandering back to the ancient texts he had studied so long. Ago.it had been an accidental discovery, a series of files hidden deep within the colony's forgotten archives. Elvin had come across them during one of his rare off-shifts, more out of desperation for distraction than anything else. The files contained ancient combat techniques, passed down from Earth's oldest civilizations, from swordsmanship and martial arts to tactical warfare. As he studied these forgotten arts, something awoke within him, a sense of purpose. This was what humanity had lost, what had made them once indomitable. And perhaps it was what could save them now. Elvin began to train in secret, his movements clumsy at first, unpracticed and weak from years of labor. But each night, he pushed himself harder, visualizing the techniques, feeling the strength return to his limbs. His body became lean and strong, his mind sharper than ever. It wasn't long before he realized that he could not do this alone. The rebellion needed more than one man. Lena was the first to join him, a former soldier who had lost her unit in the early days of the invasion. She had been resistant at first, skeptical of Elvin's idealism. "You're talking about fighting the Zinther with ancient combat techniques? With what, sticks and stones?" she had scoffed. But Elvin's determination, and perhaps the glimmer of hope in his eyes, had convinced her to try. Soon, others followed, survivors who had nothing left to lose. Drake, the young mechanic who could rig just about anything, joined the group as well, bringing with him the technical skills they so desperately needed. The days of secret training turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The group grew stronger with every session, their movements precise, their minds disciplined. The Zinther, in their arrogance, did not notice the subtle shifts in the human colony. They saw the humans as broken creatures, incapable of mounting a rebellion. That would be their first mistake. The first strike came in the dead of night. Elvin led his group in a sabotage mission, targeting one of the Zinther's resource depots. It was a small victory, a test to see if they could pull it off. And they did. Using the guerrilla tactics he had learned from the ancient texts, Elvin's group struck hard and fast, destroying critical equipment before slipping away into the night like ghosts. The Zinther were furious, doubling their patrols and increasing security, but the humans had finally tasted what they had long forgotten: resistance. Each strike became bolder, more daring. They disabled communication relays, disrupted power grids, and ambushed alien patrols. For the first time in years, the humans were fighting back, and the Zinther began to feel the pressure. But with each victory, the stakes grew higher. The Zinther responded with brutal force, executing entire sectors of human workers in retaliation. Elvin's heart sank with each loss, but he knew they could not stop now. The rebellion was no longer just about survival, it was about liberation. The final plan took shape in the ruins of an old warehouse, where Elvin's group had set up their makeshift command center. The target was the Zinther's command center, the heart of their operations on New Horizon. It was a fortress, heavily guarded by advanced weaponry and patrols. But Elvin knew their weak points. The Zinther relied too much on technology, too much on their superior machines. They underestimated human ingenuity, and that would be their second mistake. The night of the final assault was filled with tension. Elvin's team moved like shadows through the crumbling streets, their hearts pounding with anticipation. Lena took point, leading a squad through the lower tunnels that ran beneath the city, while Drake rigged a series of explosives to disable the command center's outer defenses. Elvin's group took the high ground, scaling the buildings to gain a vantage point over the main courtyard. When the first explosion rocked the ground, the Zinther scrambled into action, their mechanical forces whirring to life. But Elvin's group was ready. They struck with precision, using the element of surprise to their advantage. Lena led the charge, her combat skills honed to perfection as she tore through the Zinther ranks with the grace and power of a warrior reborn. Drake's explosives took out key defensive turrets, leaving the command center vulnerable. Elvin's heart raced as he led the final push into the command center itself. The corridors were tight, the air thick with the stench of burning metal and blood. His body moved on instinct now, every strike and counterstrike a testament to the ancient combat techniques he had mastered. His mind was clear, his focus unbreakable. He had trained for this moment, and now it was here. In the heart of the command center, Elvin came face to face with Commander Voras, the Zinther leader who had orchestrated the invasion of New Horizon. Voras stood tall, his alien form imposing, his eyes cold and calculating. But Elvin felt no fear. This was the moment he had prepared for, the ultimate showdown between human and alien. The duel was intense, a clash of two worlds. Voras fought with the raw power of his alien physique and advanced weaponry, but Elvin countered with the finesse and strategy of his human heritage. The battle was fierce, each blow bringing them closer to the edge. But in the end, it was Elvin's adaptability, his ability to think on his feet, that won the day. With a final, decisive strike, Elvin brought Voras to his knees, ending the Zinther's reign of terror. As the command center crumbled around them, the remaining Zinther forces scattered, leaderless and broken. The humans had won. The rebellion had succeeded. But the victory was bittersweet. The colony lay in ruins, and many lives had been lost in the fight for freedom. Elvin stood amidst the wreckage, his body aching, his mind weary. He had led his people to victory, but at what cost? In the days that followed, the survivors began to rebuild. The Zinther were gone, their oppressive rule dismantled, but the scars of their occupation would remain for years to come. Elvin found himself standing on a cliff overlooking the colony, the twin suns setting in the distance. He thought of the ancient texts that had guided him, the long-lost wisdom of humanity that had given them the strength to fight back. It was a reminder that no matter how advanced the enemy, no matter how overwhelming the odds, the human spirit was indomitable, the path ahead was uncertain. The Zinther might return, or another enemy might rise in their place. But Elvin knew one thing for certain: humanity would be ready. They had rediscovered what it meant to be free, and they would never again allow that freedom to be taken from them. The wind whipped through Elvin's hair as he stood tall, the weight of leadership heavy on his shoulders. But for the first time in years, he felt hope. The battle had been won, but the fight for survival would continue. And as long as there were humans willing to stand and fight, there would always be a chance for victory. Elvin watched as the twin suns dipped below the horizon, their warm glow fading into the night sky. The distant hum of rebuilding echoed faintly from the colony behind him, a constant reminder of the price they had paid for their hard-won freedom. His people were safe, for now, but the future weighed heavily on his mind. He had spent years studying the past, unraveling the mysteries of ancient cultures, but now he was faced with the daunting task of shaping a new future for humanity. The Zinther were gone, but the scars of their rule would linger. As the leader of the rebellion, Elvin knew that many would look to him for guidance. He wasn't sure he was ready to lead in a time of peace. The skills he had rediscovered, the combat techniques, the tactical brilliance, had served him well in battle, but what use were they now? Could he guide his people in rebuilding their shattered world, in creating something lasting and strong out of the ruins of oppression? A soft rustle of footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Lena appeared at his side, her silhouette outlined against the fading light. Her once battered armor was still smeared with the grime of battle, but her face was calm, her eyes steady. "You're thinking too much again," she said, her voice a quiet reassurance against the backdrop of the empty plains. Elvin let out a weary chuckle. "Old habits, I guess. There's just so much to consider now. We won the battle, but that doesn't mean we've won the war. We don't even know if they'll return." Lena crossed her arms, leaning against a broken piece of the wall they stood beside. "They might. Or they might not. Either way, we'll be ready for them. You taught us to fight, to think on our feet, to adapt. That doesn't go away just because the Zinther are gone. You gave us hope, Elvin. That's more than most people get in a lifetime." He looked over at her, admiring the quiet strength she had shown throughout their ordeal. Lena had been one of the first to stand by his side when the rebellion was nothing more than a half-formed idea. Now, she was as much a leader to their people as he was. If there was anyone capable of carrying them forward, it was her. "I'm just not sure if hope is enough anymore," Elvin admitted, his gaze dropping to the cracked ground beneath his feet. "I've always been better at looking backward, you know. The past made sense to me. It had rules, patterns. But this, rebuilding a world? I don't even know where to start." Lena turned to face him fully, her voice firm. "You start by trusting the people around you. We've all been through hell together. We know what needs to be done. The rebuilding, the future, that doesn't rest on your shoulders alone, Elvin. You don't have to do this by yourself." He nodded, feeling a flicker of relief at her words. She was right, of course. He had always been the type to take too much on, to feel the weight of the world pressing down on him. But this wasn't just his fight anymore. They had won it together, and together they would build what came next. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the quiet of the night settling around them. The stars began to appear in the sky, bright and sharp, a reminder that the universe was vast and full of possibility. Lena's voice broke the silence again, softer this time. "You know, I never imagined I'd be here, standing on the edge of victory. I thought we'd all die long before we ever saw the Zinther fall. But here we are. And we're still standing." Elvin glanced over at her, the corner of his mouth lifting in a small smile. "You're as stubborn as I am." I guess that's why we made it this far. Maybe. She laughed lightly. But we're not done yet. He knew she was right. There was still much to be done, and the challenges ahead would be as complex as the battles they had fought. The colony needed to be rebuilt, alliances needed to be formed, and the threat of the Zinther, or any other enemy, still loomed over them. But for the first time in a long time, Elvin felt a sense of peace. "We'll figure it out," he said at last, his voice steady. "One step at a time." Lena nodded, and they stood together for a while longer, watching as the last of the daylight disappeared. When she finally turned to leave, Elvin remained, his thoughts no longer burdened by doubt but focused instead on the possibilities of tomorrow. In the days that followed, Elvin threw himself into the work of rebuilding. The survivors rallied around him and the others who had led the rebellion. People who had once been nothing more than laborers, beaten down by years of servitude, began to take on new roles. Drake, the young mechanic who had saved them countless times with his quick thinking and technical skills, became instrumental in restoring power and communication systems. Lena coordinated efforts to clear debris and establish new living spaces. There were moments of hardship, of course. Supplies were limited, and many of the colony's critical infrastructure had been destroyed during the fighting. Food and clean water were scarce, and tempers often flared as people adjusted to their new reality. But through it all, Elvin remained a steady presence, always ready to listen, to mediate disputes, to remind his people of what they had gained, and what they had to protect. One evening, as the workday came to an end, Elvin found himself standing in the old library, the very place where he had first discovered the ancient texts that had changed everything. Dust still coated the shelves, but the air felt different now, lighter, somehow. He ran his fingers along the spines of the forgotten books, wondering how much more there was to learn, how much more humanity had lost that could still be rediscovered. The sound of footsteps behind him made him turn, and he was unsurprised to see Drake standing in the doorway, his face smudged with dirt and grease from the day's work. "Found you here again," Drake said with a grin. "You're always drawn back to this place." Elvin shrugged. "I guess it's where it all started, isn't it? Where I found the key to fighting back." Drake nodded, his expression more serious now. "And you think there's more in these old books that can help us in the future?" "I don't know," Elvin admitted. "But I think it's worth finding out. We've only scratched the surface of what's in here. There might be other things, other techniques, other knowledge, that could help us in ways we can't even imagine yet." Drake walked over to one of the shelves, pulling down a heavy, dust-covered tome and flipping through its pages. "You're right. Who knows what we might find? But even if we don't find anything else, what you discovered was enough to save us. That's more than anyone could have asked for." Elvin smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him at the younger man's words. "I didn't save us alone, Drake. It took all of us." Drake looked up from the book, meeting Elvin's gaze. "Yeah, but you were the one who gave us a reason to fight. Don't forget that." Elvin didn't reply, but as he stood there in the quiet library, surrounded by the remnants of a past long forgotten, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. They had come so far, and though the road ahead was still uncertain, he no longer feared what was to come. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them together, stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever, and as long as they had that, there was nothing they couldn't overcome.